अब तो कम कम ही रहेंगे थोड़े, फिर रहता नहीं है अब। तभी तो मुझे ये लग रहा है कि ये प्रोग्राम करने भी। हाँ
सब
बहरहाल
निकल
ये,
जाते हैं।
हाँ
सब
नहीं, फिर इसका ये है पर्पस के बाद में लगाया जाए यूट्यूब पे।
हाँ, यूट्यूब पे तो है,
तो कम कम ही रहेंगे।
ये यूट्यूब पे तो आ रहा है, यूट्यूब पे रहता है।
जली
ये हमारे यहाँ सालेहा होगा, वो जो हमारे यहाँ पहुँचे
ज़ालिहा, हाँ वही होगा, प्रोनाउंसिएशन का फर्क है।
संजय सिंह
आ गया है अच्छा, संजय सिंह है, असद मलिक।
Prof. Wani, can you hear me, Prof. Wani?
या
Yeah.
वेलकम बैक।
My internet is not stable. My internet connection is not stable now. Is it possible to hand over sharing the session back to you, Prof. Wani?
इनको कुछ
पुनीत
संजय
कई लोग हैं, लेकिन वो ज़्यादा भी बहुत से लोग।
जी अच्छा, शायद कुछ है वो, यहाँ से तो नहीं कर सकते हम।
वो बहुत है, यहाँ से करें वहाँ दोनों की जगह।
अच्छा, तो आप यहाँ
से भी कर सकते हैं।
हाँ यहाँ से कर देते हैं, ठीक है।
मुझे कहिए, प्लीज अनम्यूट कीजिए।
आप अपने को अनम्यूट कर दीजिए, वहाँ कुछ है इसमें
रिक्वेस्ट देखिए, रिक्वेस्ट
ठीक है सर, कर दिया।
जी आप ठीक है, ओके।
सालिया कुछ कह रही है,
ओके
अनस्टेबल है उनका।
ठीक
Okay,
है
sir.
हाँ
डॉक्टर सालेहा से सर
Okay, I would, now we are starting the technical session second, and this will be chaired by Professor Dr. Zaleha Kamaruddin. As she was in the inaugural session, she is former rector of International Islamic University, Malaysia, and she'll be with us as the chairperson for this session. And because of technical reasons, I may render some assistance. Now we are having ready with us Professor Sanjay Singh. Ma'am, you can, in the capacity of chairperson, yeah, if you want to formally invite him to talk, yeah, please.
Thank you, Prof. Wani.
Yeah.
I did mention to you earlier that my internet connection at the moment is not stable, so I might have some technicalities problem, but meanwhile, while it is okay, we are going to proceed with this session, which is basically on the theme of UN redefining responsibilities of nation states and global community for contributing to promotion of peace process. Alhamdulillah, we have with us Prof. Sanjay Singh, Dr. Asad Malik, Dr. Khalid Wasil, and I'm not quite sure whether she is, Professor Puneet is also together in one session. But basically, because of time constraint, I will just be brief in introducing the speaker. The first speaker for this session is Dr. Sanjay Singh. I will just read the CV, a very brief CV. Dr. Sanjay is presently Director of Sundardeep College of Law, Ghaziabad, former head Chanda Prabhu Jain College of Higher Studies and Fairfield Institute of Management and Technology, New Delhi. He holds a doctorate degree both in law and political science. And based on the paper that was sent to me earlier, that his topic would be United Nations Peace Paradigm of Responsibilities for Nation States for Attaining Durable International Cooperation for Peace as a Commitment to World Community. So without further ado, may I kindly invite Prof. Sanjay Singh. Please, Prof.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. God bless you.
yeah
Thank you. Today, my topic, United Nations Peace Paradigm of Responsibilities for Nation States for Attaining Durable International Cooperation for Peace and Commitment to the World Community. Having the experience of the First World War and the Second World War, the world leaders of several countries and many people of civil society made concerted efforts to build another world body to achieve lasting peace. On the basis of several deliberation on 24 October 1945, UNO came into existence as the Francisco Conference. Its objective and principles were described in its charter, which speaks, "We, the people of United Nations, have decided firmly to save the coming generation from the deep agony of two wars which the people have faced in their lives. Besides a few pious principles, two main objectives are given in the Charter of United Nations. Number one, to build and maintain international peace and security. Number two, to promote international cooperation among the members of the United Nations, which is necessary to achieve peace. 6 organs were created to achieve the objectives of the United Nations. Security Council is given the main responsibility of securing international peace and security. If we examine the working of the United Nations and its success to achieve the main objective of the United Nations, international peace and security, we can conclude the only success that it has been able to check the outbreak of the Third World War. In spite of several grave provocations at different points of time, different issues, credit should also be given to the United Nations promoting international cooperation in different areas. It means agencies like ILO, WHO, WFO, UNESCO, and World Bank have been playing significant roles in their respective areas. In spite of these positive achievements of the United Nations, the world is still not free from the danger of the Third World War. On the face of several tensions and crises in different areas, the world community at large is facing several changes for its existence, the threat to climate, issue of international terrorism, a made race, destructive weapons, health hazards, suspicious trades, territorial issues, and maritime disputes are some of the issues on which all members of the world community are having double standards and are victim of protection. They are not genuinely interested to solve the above issue as the result of gravity of above issues. There is an increasing threat to world peace, and for this, all the members of the world community are directly or indirectly responsible. It is therefore necessary that to achieve the objective of securing international peace and cooperation, every member of the world community should rise above the hypocrisy of narrow national interest and must think of the common interest of the entire world community, which is expected in the Charter of the United Nations. It can be further added that the assumptions surrounding peace that now exist have been legitimated by a broad international consensus implemented in United Nations consensus building. Despite the weakness of the consensus and the lack of resources made available for its implementation, it is increasing, being seen by some states, agencies, and NGOs are legitimizing multilateral and even unilateral usage of force if necessary. These tensions between the use of force and creation of peace, initially constructed by the same actor, has now led to a separation of functions where the use of force and peace building are coordinated by different actors. These can be seen in the cases of Bosnia, Kosovo, Syria, Leon, and Afghanistan. More recently, Furthermore, the United Nations itself, more specifically the Secretariat, agencies, and institutions, has acceptable ends provided democratic conception of peace are often more pressing and legitimate than allowing the arguments for or against humanitarian intervention to impede the establishment of peace operations. Democratization process and political reform under its auspices. The recent reluctance to accept the US and UK attempts the norm of non-intervention for regions related to humanitarianism and weapons of mass destruction on the part of some Security Council members, the Secretariat, and member of the General Assembly on account of their stance against possible in the cases of Iraq, Afghanistan, Kosovo, for example, has not dismissed the resolve of the United Nations that it should be involved in post-conflict peace building in line with its charter. Indeed, the United Nations itself reflects thin mix of liberalism and realism. The biggest threat and hindrance to achieve the objective of securing international peace, security, and international cooperation had been the frequent misuse of veto power by the permanent members of the United Nations, UK, USA, China, France, and Russia. In the wake of Korea crisis of 1950 and Cuba crisis 1961, there was high intensity of Cold War, which had put the question mark on the working of United Nations system. The main organ of Security Council had become almost non-functional. In the era of Cold War, there was big mutual rivalry between two camps, communist camp led by USSR and capitalist camp led by USA, has extended the Cold War to the newly emerging states in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. These kind of tense environment had affected international cooperation even in these new countries very adversely. Although the General Assembly, which is its legislature and is a house of representative of all the member countries of world and wonderful record of contribution in achieving the objectives of the United Nations. It was only General Assembly which saved the face of United Nations by passing resolution for peace in 1950. On the face of grave crisis of Korea, in the wake of changing structure of world community and rise of various pressures from different continent of the world, there is a growing demand for restructuring the United Nations and set the new agenda for this world body. Kofi Annan Committee, headed by former Secretary General of United Nations, had suggested certain amendments in United Nations. There also a strong demand by several atomic energy having place in Security Council state like India, Brazil, Israel, Korea are demanding place in Security Council. credit must be given to the United Nations that it has been successful in integrating the aggregating the issues and challenges of the new scenario facing the world today, which is the ultimate hope for peaceful for the mankind. The sage advices and views of Security General of United Nations must be given due attention as he is the real spokesman of United Nations who is supposed to be an unbiased international person. Thank you.
नहीं वो मैडम करेंगे इनका. Thank you so much,
Thank you. Thank you,
Professor
sir. Thank you.
Sanjay. You have really highlighted. I believe that you are definitely correct in emphasizing the responsibilities of the states. We cannot have peace without their assuming the responsible character. So Professor Zaliha would carry on the session. And thank you, Sanjay. And your contribution
Thank you.
will be a very good part of the publication as well as the future programs. And we wish that persons like you must be a continuous part of such academic activities. You are carrying the distinction of being a political scientist as well as a jurist. So that's great, and that's how you can contribute very good in future as well. Thank you a lot.
Sir.
Thank you so much.
Sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you.
For taking over the chairmanship of the discussion. If I may add, I think it's quite interesting to have this paper by Prof. Sanjay Singh because during experience attending several programs at United Nations, people are full of idealism about what United Nations can do. And I wish I could read Professor Sanjay Singh paper. So without further ado, we move on to Dr. Asad Malik. Dr. Muhammad Asad Malik is Assistant Professor in the Faculty of Law, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. His area of specialization is constitutional law, administrative law, law of tort, and law of tort. He has been teaching constitutional law, comparative constitution, administrative law, law of tort, comparative, jurisprudence, professional ethics, clinical course, seminar course, legal and constitutional evidence, and election of law. That's a lot, and a wide range of laws. Based on the paper, Dr. Asad Malik is given about 20 minutes or 15 minutes actually now to talk on responsibilities of nation states for promoting within their jurisdictions societies with peace, harmony, justice, and fair order as envisaged by universal instruments. So without further ado, may I kindly invite Dr. Asad Malik, please.
Dr.
You're most welcome.
नहीं लेकिन वो
उन्होंने किसी और नाम से चल ज्वाइन किया डॉक्टर देवेंद्र जी हेलो हेलो
Okay, I believe now we have Dr. Asad Malik with us. He is on a national mission somewhere and still being very much concerned about the theme of peace. He has kindly agreed to be with us this afternoon. I request on behalf of the chairperson,
Yes.
Professor Dr. Asad, please
Yes,
give
sir.
your presentation. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, respected chair, Zaila Kamruddin madam, respected Professor Afzal Wani sahab. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And Janab Manzoor Ahmed Saab, or all the members of the organizing committee, and the speakers of this technical session, Professor Sanjay Singh, Khalid Basim, and Professor P. Puneet. My topic is responsibility of the nation state for promoting within their jurisdiction societies with peace, harmony, justice, and fair order as envisaged in the international instrument. Since the morning, from the inaugural session, and number of the papers have been presented, and many stalwarts spoken on this role of the United Nations and the other international instruments. Actually, this nowadays the degree of this proximity among the nation was realized, particularly during this outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which impacted the whole world. The suffering, struggle, resistance, countermeasures vary from country to country, and the many steps have been taken by the different countries. Now, this topic of the day is related to the how to promote the harmony, peace, and justice within the jurisdiction in the light of the international instrument. As we know that the two world wars paved the way for establishment of the United Nations, and in last 2 and 3 decades, rapid economic development has been the primary agenda for national governments, especially in the context of the developing countries. Countries with this robust infrastructure and liberal regime have made good economic progress. While so far as the other economic development of the nation is concerned, helped in taking many million people out of poverty, multiple social problems have been overshadowed by the tremendous economic progress. The issue of the violation of the human rights, suffering of the women, children, and underprivileged population is overlooked by the state actors on the strength of the economic data like per capita income, increased level of the production of goods and services, decrease in the unemployment. The social conditions also depreciated from this agenda of the development and indifference of national government in strengthening the institutions and practices conductive for human dignity and human rights, ignite the debate for bringing a paradigm shift in government's model. The wave of the globalization have been connecting all the countries of the world into a community to an unprecedented extent, which implies that a mankind society in its true sense is taking shape. In the meantime, the significance of peace and harmony is being recognized by more and more far-sighted people. Promoting peace requires valuing and considering both oneself and others. As such, peace is central to every situation throughout lives. Just as a child is enriched, and this requires that we want to live in the peace, and the meaning in our lives grows as we learn to recognize and take more responsibility for one and another in the world. There is an obligation on the nation states that requires states to conduct themselves peacefully in all relations with other states, and there is a similar obligation to conduct relations towards their own people in a peaceful way. That is to honor human rights to peace. In this paper, I am going to discuss particularly the responsibilities of the nation state. As Professor Sanjay Singh in his paper discuss about this role of the United Nations, and my topic is also dealing with the international instrument. As we know, there is the main objective of the United Nations after the two world war to promote the harmony and the peace, and the main role played by the Security Council. Number of the international instruments are there. For example, Charter of the United Nations, as we know, Universal Declaration of the Human Rights, International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights, International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Convention on the Elimination of all form of discrimination against women, Declaration on the Right to Development, Convention on the Child Right, Convention on the Rights of the Person with Disabilities, or many others institutions. As the role played by the United Nations in this direction, as discussed in the previous sessions, as well as by the Professor Sanjay Singh as well, particularly the preamble of United Nations is talking about what will be the main role to save the succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in the lifetime has brought this untold sorrow to the mankind. Means there are a number of the articles in the United Nations Charter. Particularly, we will see that charter, this Article 2 and this 26, 27, 39, which also talks about the responsibility and the liability of the nation state. The question is that whether these nations, means as we know that all the states are sovereign, they are having their own constitutions, and constitution is considered as a Grundnorm, means the fundamental law of that particular country. And we know that after this 1948, almost all the constitutions had this enacted constitutions. The question is that what are the international norms for the purpose of promoting the peace as a global trend? As the peace for the purpose of the international law may be defined as the absence of the aggression, armed conflict, or use or threat the use of the force in violation of the United Nations Charter. And the presence means the commitment, conditions under which the fundamental human rights, dignity, and the worth of the human peace, the equal rights of men, women, nations large and small, justice, respect for the obligation arising from the treaties and the source of the international law. And after this establishment of the United Nations, there has been a constant international effort to strengthen this peace, harmony, and order in the different society. As we know that there are different kind of the incidents, as also cited by Professor Sanjay Singh. Other than this, also we know about the civil wars and disputes also between the nations. There are many countries who are having conflict or war with their neighbors or other nations. Israel, Palestine, United States of America, Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, Japan. It means it reflects that there is a conflict. And act of aggression by USA and other superpower also sometimes the question how to maintain the peace, because these are the superpower. If as they invaded in the countries like Iraq or Afghanistan, then what will be the role of these international organizations or these institutions? And how to uphold the rule of law, and how to protect the fundamental human rights of these citizens of these countries. So means in this respect, there is a need of the balance between these international conventions or instruments as well as the domestic laws. And one of the main problem we are facing this time in the world, religious fundamentalism. And this is directly even related to the human rights. Because in the name of this fundamentalism, there are number of the kinds of the violation of the rights, number of the people are being killed, number of the peoples has been devastated, as we are having the certain examples. So actually here, number of the people's movement also initiated for the purpose of promoting this peace and harmony in the different nations, along with these institutions. Now the question, how does the United Nations maintain the international peace and security? As we know that this certain preventive measures and even mediation is one of the most popular example, and it is also cited in the United Nations Charter, peacekeeping, peace building, and this countering terrorism and this disarmament. So these are the steps taken by the United Nations. Now, this responsibility of the state to observance of the peace in their domestic spheres. How to? So actually, this according to Bruno Simma, he said that states are under a positive legal obligation to settle a dispute peacefully and not to leave it unresolved. This is moving force behind Article 2, paragraph 3 of this United Nations Charter, whose manifestation can be seen in Article 33 of the United Nations Charter. And the peace at the international level is manifested under two heads. Number one, positive peace. Positive peace where international actors are seen as enablers of the world orders. This includes the obligation of the human right. Second is negative peace. This includes the prevention of this jus ad valem regime. And the responsibility of the maintenance of the peace in the domestic spheres require the observance of the principle of pacta sunt servanda. This principle has been institutionalized under Article 2 of paragraph 2 of the charters and Article 26, 27, and 46 of the Vienna Convention of Law of Treaty, that is 1969. And by virtue of Article 27 and Article 46 of this convention, municipal law cannot be used. This is one of the very important points. Municipal law cannot be used to defeat the purpose of an international treaty. Some of the methods which municipal law has used to defeat the purpose of international law, but have not been accepted. For example, the full powers were not issued by the authorized person of the office. The treaty ought to have been presented to the approval of the parliament. Then parliament did not approve the treaty, yet the executive ratified it. The vote in parliament did not reach the quantum. So means these are the certain examples when they will not be allowed. And one of the sensitive area, the meeting point of the municipal and international law is the concept of the terrorism. By virtue of the General Assembly Resolution 2625 1970 and Article 2 of Para 2 of the Charter states under a positive legal obligation not to use threat or use of force against the territory integrity of the other member state or resort to use of the force. This also includes the notions of aggression. General Assembly has adopted a definition of the aggression in this resolution 3314. Means it reflects that these measures taken to control the terrorism as a national level, and was one of the this resolution 1373. This resolution, member states were required to make anti-terror laws in domestic spheres. As we know, a number of the countries have this. The issue of the terrorism is an aspect of the state of the responsibility, and violation make the state liable under the doctrine of international law. As we know that the municipal law have been a doctrine of the responsibility to protect, and it is the aspect of the positive peace under international law. Because this is known as an upgraded version of the concept of the humanitarian intervention. Whereas the humanitarian intervention was only limited to use the military measures under chapter 7 to save the situation in a state where which could trigger the collective security regime under Article 39. Now I am coming this India. What is the position in our country? Because this other than this 2 points which I mentioned, the achieving security, particularly rule of law and all these points will come, and then achieving good governance, as I mentioned in the introduction, that is one of the responsibility of each and every nation state, good governance. And the place of international law and legal system has been affected by the post-war emphasis on the human rights and domestic governance. Actually, so far as the India is concerned, as we know that what kind of initiative has been taken, as in our country, we know the constitution is one of the fundamental law of the land and preservance of the rule of law and maintenance of the peace. It is a duty of the government. Article 51 of Directive Principles of the State Policy, which is talking about the promotion of the international peace and security. The state shall endeavor to foster respect of international law and treaty obligation in dealing with the organized people with one. Article 253, which gives the power to the parliament to make law for the purpose of the implementation of any agreement, convention, and treaty. Union List entry 14, which talks about entering into the treaty agreement with the foreign countries and implementing the treaties, agreement, and convention. And we know that this absence of the domestic law occupying the field to formulate the effective measures to maintain peace, the countries of the international conventions and norms are significant for the purpose of the interpretation. As Honorable Supreme Court in the case of the Vishakha versus the state of Rajasthan, 1997, talks about this international convention not inconsistent with the fundamental right and harmony with its spirit must be read into these provisions to enlarge the meaning and content thereof. And other than this, Article 73 also, which is related to the executive power of the Union, shall extend to the matter with respect to which the Parliament has power to make law. India has been a forefront of the implementing the international norms, celebrating human dignity and human rights, because Part 3 and Part 4 of the Constitution of India, that is particularly enable the people in general and citizen in particular to enjoy certain freedoms and rights which are essence, the core human values recognized under the universal instrument. Indian judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court of India, has championed the enforcement of the international norms related to the human rights. As we know that one of the case decided by Honorable Supreme Court in 2009, National Human Rights Commission versus State of Gujarat, 2009, where the Supreme Court said the communal harmony is the hallmark of the democracy. If the people are being killed in the name of the religion, they are not less than the terrorists, and it is the negation of the rule of law. So means the Honorable Supreme Court time to time pass very good judgment. We know recently the certain examples in our country, for example, this related to the UAPA, CA protest, anti-conversion law recently, the problems is going on, former protest and atrocities against some people. But so far as the national law is concerned, means the Constitution of India and the judiciary, we have sufficient laws, and we have a number of the judgment which were delivered by the court of law for the purpose of this good governance and to protect the rights and to promote the harmony, because the preamble of the Constitution of India, fraternity asserting the dignity of the individual, and in this fundamental duty number 5 to promote the harmony. So it reflects that there are number of the provisions in the domestic law for the purpose of the promotion of the harmony, peace and justice. So finally, I am going to conclude that this significance of the international instruments and adoption implementation of the principle may be measured in terms of the advancement of this. And I hope that these international instruments will be followed by all the nations in the light of the domestic jurisdictions, particularly the Constitution, for the purpose of maintaining peace and harmony. Thank you very much, sir.
So much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chairperson, please give your comments.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hasan Malik, Dr. Asad Malik, and one for keeping the time well within the time given. Number two, I realized that there are several more issues, although it is quite difficult to assess the efficacy of the international instrument, for promotion of peace. Although he had given example of India, but within the time given, I would understand that he is limited in terms of giving ideas on how and to what extent. How and what extent, how and what extent peace and harmony, justice and fair order as envisaged by universal instruments, yeah. But we are lucky, as promised by IOS, that they will be publishing your paper. I guess many more people will have access to your work. So without further ado, let me introduce you Dr. Khalid Wasim Hassan, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Politics and Governance of Central University of Kashmir. Previously, he was working as assistant professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences from 2013 to 2016, and he has also taught at the postgraduate Department of Political Science of St. Joseph College at Bangalore and School of Undergraduate Studies of Ambedkar University, Delhi. He completed his PhD from Institute for Social and Economic Change, in which he worked on the Islamist and secular discourses in post-1988 self-determination movement in Kashmir, in a collaborative research of Tata Institute of Social Sciences and London School of Economics on violence against women. I'm going to get all of this. He contributed his research on state violence against women in armed conflict of Kashmir. He has also been working on emergence of multiple public spheres in a conflict zone like Kashmir. He visited the University of Münster, Germany under that exchange program in 2016. And Khalid also visited South Asian Institute, SOAS, on Charles Wallace Fellowship in 2017, where he worked on public space in conflict zones. He was a visiting fellow at Sydney Sussex College and Centre for South Asian Studies of the University of Cambridge in 2018. Well, his research area includes post-colonial theory, ethnic and nationalist movements in South Asia, and human rights. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Khalid Wasim Hassan. Please, Doctor, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you so much, to Chair, for introducing me with so good words. And thank you to Professor Vani for organizing this conference and inviting us for this platform. May I share my PowerPoint?
Yes, please.
Can I request the host to allow me to share?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Please share.
Yeah, we are not getting any. Yes.
But connection from your side is a little poor. So please be considered.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me start with what the host just told. We are having very less speed of internet here for a very long time, which is itself not in line with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the people here are facing this problem for long. Let me start with this definition. I will take up actually the issue which Professor Pradhan in morning session, and Professor Asbar Beg, who happened to my teacher also, they started. I'm here looking at the effectiveness and relevance of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but I will be trying to critically evaluate this, and being a student of political science, I will just try to take a vantage point of theorization in political science. How do we see it? If Universal Declaration of Human Rights have a relevance right now, and why so? And if they are not effective, why so? And what happened? Do we really need to go deeper into understanding of the conceptualization of rights itself, which became the hallmark of Declaration of Human Rights in 1948? What was the story behind? Why it's effective in certain parts, not effective in other parts? Why there is a selective amnesia from the organizations, bigger organizations, as Professor Pradhan and Asmar Beg, Professor Asmar Beg also talked about the failure of League of Nations. Is United Nations actually a successful story, or there are questions on its implementation also? Usually, in our subject international relations, the scholarship is divided between realists and liberal internationalists, who try to look at the how the world is governed. Are states important, and are the national interests important? Or, as the liberals say, there are chances of peace. There are chances of collaboration, which was influenced by Immanuel Kant's perpetual peace. And taking that direction, I think United Declaration is like the product of this framework, the liberal internationalism, where the possibility of peace was seen. Emergence of this adaptation of United Nations Declaration of Human Rights was considered as a revolutionary step, because if we look at the history of First World War and the Second World War, the whole devastation and the suffering of the human beings, and the alliances, wars, and trust deficit that were among the nations, in order to address that, United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is considered revolutionary because it tried to address all these issues, and it actually brought what we call as collective legitimation of the states. Unlike a League of Nations, the states were made more transparent, to act as a the post-colonial states, and most of the states which became independent after 1948 and the whole era of 1950s and 60s, where we see the emergence of newly independent states, in most of their constitutions, United Nations Declaration became very much influential. If you look at even Indian Constitution, or if you look at many other constitutions in South Asia and other parts, you will see that there are influences of this declaration on how rights have been defined in their respective constitutions. The best part of this declaration was that the divide, which was the divide in the Cold War politics also, whether to consider civil and political rights important or whether economic and social and cultural rights are important. This declaration actually tried to incorporate it, became more inclusive because it brought both. It acted as a balancing act, right? Bringing both sides together and trying to be more inclusive of all the rights. There are a lot of works and even in the recent scholarship, if you look at international relations and people who are working on international organizations, they go back to this era of 1948 and what was happening, the debates at that time, and try to see that how important it is. Imagining human rights, which are enshrined in the Declaration of Human Rights, it's impossible to think about society right now because the discourse is so dominant that you cannot escape. You think that you are within it, whether you are in the global north or in the global south, wherever you are living, you feel you are part of this discourse. Even if you look at the works of Gordon Brown recently in 2016, though he talks about the how Second World War became a kind of a starting point of this discussion, but then he also talks about that how it actually encouraged the idea that all human beings belong to one civilization. That's why these rights are important: right to respect each other, right where the morality was brought back to this world. And one important thing, that if we look at the importance of this declaration, the importance is that the common understanding of what rights are and what human rights violations are. There was a common thread where people from different nations started believing in what rights are, and if the denial is happening, how to address those. Even the work of Anthony D. Bates, he tries to look at the historical historicity of this act, how in different eras there was a change in it when the United Nations Declaration from just aspiration attained the legal sanctity. It was not just what in ideal what kind of an utopian world you want, but there was kind of an sanctity where the states participated. There was a ratification of a lot of conventions by the nation states. So if you look at the number of conventions which were believed and which were agreed by the states, like International Convention of against the racial discrimination, against the discrimination of women, or against the torture or the treatment in the prisons, or even the child rights, or there was an important paper in the earlier session by our respected chair today on the United Nations, the Convention of the Women, how all these things were becoming important, and it was becoming all the states and the people living in these states, for them it became an important. And most of the constitutions which were formulated, adopted, they tried to adapt this in their incorporate these laws in conventions in their constitutional framework also. But here I want to make a point of departure from the earlier presentations, where I try to look at it from the critical point of view also. Can we take everything what is given on Universal Declaration of Human Rights as the universal and the end of the debate, or there are problems? And if there are the problems, why are these problems? Why to see these problems are? One of the important criticisms is the international norms that became the hallmark of UDHR. Are these norms Eurocentric? Were these norms influenced by American exceptionalism? Was there also a difference between who created this discourse? Who was the part of this discussion of these discourse? Was there a difference between the people who were from the colonized world and people who were from so-called free world? Or the question is there a need to decolonize this whole notion of human rights? There is a recent work by Hakimi Assaghir, who looked at the alternative notions of human rights. Where in detail he discussed about that how even the religions like Islam can play an important role in discussing what human rights are, and which will be internationally accepted. But nevertheless, if you look at the philosophers like John Rawls, also, who had an very interesting and important work on the concept of justice, even he was not in agreement that human rights discourse is associated with a particular philosophy, or it emerged from a particular society. Rather, he was trying to look at from the universal point of view. What are the common threads which connect every human being to define justice? But then we need to look that position also very critically. That it really does it really mean that the discourse itself is universal, or there are problems? The problems that I identify is the problem of conceptualization. How are the rights conceptualized? Who conceptualize them? And are the people who are at the margins, are they part of this conceptualization? What rights are when the rights are defined? Is there also the question also is about the hierarchy of power, power politics? There were in the early session some questions related to whether United Nations is really workable. Is it different from League of Nations, or there is hierarchy also in the working of United Nations, where the power play is important? Then also the question of whose discourse is it? Should I, from the global south, also associate? Is it my discourse, or is it discourse which we import from somewhere else? And then last but not the least, the problem of implementation. Even if we agree whatever is in the United Nations Declaration, that is the morally correct, and that is to be implemented all across the world, why there is a problem in the implementation? My vantage point is people at margins. Most of the societies in global south are at the margins. There are struggles happening. There are social movements. There are struggles for self-determination, struggles for rights, struggles for gender equality. All these struggles tell us that there are people who are at the margins, who are not satisfied with the existing discourse. So my definition, I problematize this notion of marginality with that are the people who are not part of the discourse creation, who are not part of the conceptualization. It's not only economy or political rights which the denial of which makes people at margins. Even the not being the part of the conceptualization makes people at the margins. And people of the global south, and the people who are economically from the poor regions, or who are facing problems the existing states, there is a double sword on their head. First, they are marginalized because of their economic positionality. Secondly, they have not been part of this discourse creation. So there is a lot of academia right now. They are involved in this question, coming from Africa, South Asia, as well as Latin America. They challenge this dominant discourse, where they say it's very much Eurocentric, and there is so much of Western theorization. If I go historically, that why did this why did this question of rights, which has been adapted in 1948, has it some historical trajectory, or all of a sudden it was thought? There is historical trajectory of this, and in order to understand that, we need to look at the rights which was earlier discussed. How, as we define more historically, we can make chronologically distinction between objective rights and subjective rights. Objective rights are which are more concerned about the morality of what is going to happen in the society. If I take an example, the Greek states, the philosophers at that time, they were the questions which they were struggling with was more of the about the society, the universality of this, that how to address these questions. It was not about a particular individual. It was not a question about whose rights. It was about larger society. But the subjective rights which emerged later on, that questions about what are the attributes individual. So if we talk about presently now, it's the subjective rights have become part of the present day discourse. The role of religion and theology, that is important, which so many people actually sometimes try to ignore, because in order to kind of say academia, they try to not was happening Europe, how Christianity played a dominant role, even in the questions of why an individual should be given right, because there was this notion that individual is not just a physical body, individual has a soul and there is a connection to the God. So that's why Christianity played an important role in bringing back this question of subjective rights, where individual was considered as an abstract, where he or she and as an individual, why the rights of these individuals were talked about. Even if you look at John Locke's work, who's a social theorist, he talks about, God owns us as a property and endows us with certain rights. But apart from the role of religion that played, an important role which still plays in a connection, an important connection which we need to understand, is that what happened in 17th century becomes an important part of even understanding the contemporary times. And I'm talking here about the context of capitalism, how there is a relationship between emergence of capitalism and the way rights are now, the way rights are defined now. So capitalism itself became a context. And most of the Europe, if you look at how the rise of capitalism and the enclosure of the moment when the collective farming or collective ownership was stopped and people were forced to actually work on the land on the wage. So the whole notion of collective solidarity was changed into individual competition. And that's actually one of the important, the profit, individual competition, important hallmarks of capitalism. But what I'm trying to say, that the growth of capitalism and the discourse of human rights, they emerged hand in hand. The way capitalism was changing the world, setting the world in its own logic of profit and profit maximization and individual competition, the human rights also followed the same path. It was actually working in nexus with each other, the way human rights were defined, where individual again became an abstraction, as if individual doesn't have anything else and doesn't have any other identity. That's how you will see that how in a capitalistic mode of economy, individual as a worker became faced exploitation, because he or she were just treated as a human abstract, as an individual who have minimum limited rights as an individual. So it was actually also going away from the notion of collective or the collective rights. So individuality took the front space. Now, when my question also here is that the problem of implementation. It's not only about conceptualization. Even if I agree with, if I do not follow this genetic fallacy that rights came because of capitalism, and that's why I'm not agreeing with that. Problem doesn't lie there only. Problem also lies why there is selective implementation in certain areas and not other areas, or where are the loopholes. For that, I relied on the Hegelian notion of division between civil society and political society, where civil society is a space where the market lies, where the individuals are doing business, or where the individual interactions happen, and the political state is where the rules and regulations are made. This division also helps us to understand that there is also a division among human beings. There are human beings who are considered private individual human beings, and there are human beings who were considered as political citizens. So as a state, rights were enshrined on or given only to who were considered as political citizens. So here again, when there is an implementation, who will get the right? The right will be given only to who will qualify as a political citizen, not as a private individual. So, but then the question is that who is going to implement this? And I'm trying to talk the historically. for any enforcement of rules and regulations, you need a power. And where does that power come from? And in the present day where we are living, even we accept or not accept, like or do not like, we are living in an era of where states, modern nation states, play an important role. So it's the states who are going to implement this. And why will states implement? Where are they deriving their power from? Right. So there is again a lot of theorization. I will not go deeper into that. What is the Marxist position of what state is? But here I want to just confirm this point that states who have what Weber says monopoly over the violence, they became the implementation institutions of these human rights. But then where are states deriving their power from? Where are the states funded from? Who is running the state? These are the important questions which in contemporary times also we are dealing with. Why there is lack of human rights, why human rights happen in a modern democracies like India or United States of America, where blacks face the problem, or in India, people from Kashmir, Northeast, many others face problem, or minorities these days are facing problem. So is there a question where we need to understand where is the state deriving its power from? So what I'm trying to say that there is a connection between the power and the implementation of the rights, and the rights which people have derived over a period of time. There was this negotiation of power happening. I was giving an example to my students also that, if we look at the example of labor movement, the rights to labor were given in many states when there was a strong labor movement, when the movement was very powerful. And when the movement became weaker, there was a change in the notion of rights also. So historically, you can see what happened in England and the US when Thatcher and Reagan came together, and when they brought back the neoliberal policies. So the existence of human rights presupposes power struggle. There is a connection. My question here is now this problem in the discourse also, where we have progressed a lot. We are here claiming in present day we are no longer living in a time when there was when we believe it in divine rights of the kings. We are living in a modern nation states, but the way the discourse of human rights is implemented or is discussed, there is kind of the thin line between divine rights and the modern nation states becomes blur. The logic is same, they are modern nation state also works for the larger good, but they do not define who these people are. Our first presenter, Professor Sanji, also talked about, he started with "we the people" in the preamble. But we need to also understand how the people is being defined, whether it's a UN declaration, whether there's the constitutions where "we the people" word starts. We need to understand who these people are. Are these people part of the discourse? So here I'm not trying to deny everything what we have actually achieved from United Nations declaration. This is an important discourse. When I say that relevance, it doesn't mean that only relevance means its implementation. Relevance is also, say, for an academic people in academics like us, does it become a rallying point to discuss, when debate, or even to disagree? Still, if we disagree with it, it has a relevance. It has changed the world. It has been revolutionary in that sense. But we need to also keep a space open for the critical engagement. And I see the way forward is that in order to understand this whole conceptualization, we need to also understand the social and political configuration, what is happening in society. Without that, we cannot understand that we cannot identify the problems in the discourse. And if we look forward, that the way out, and to see, because here we are also talking about the peace, how to achieve a peaceful world, we need to also think about going back to where we started from the community life, rather than the giving more importance to the individual. We need to also see how the chronic capitalism is creating the problems, where we need to address these. We need to also, what United Nations Declaration itself talks about, self-determination, or giving rights to the people, or even having a respect for the social movements to negotiate with them. If we just follow the order where modern nation states act just as a homogeneous entities to implement what they want, we will be at loss. So the way peace is being defined, not only the negation of violence, the human rights also need reconceptualization from the ground. And then there is a need to revisit United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Khalid. I know that Way Forward is very understanding of the problems that we are facing. Thank you, Dr. Khalid. I'm glad, as a co-chair for this session, with Prof. Wani, that we've been, as a legal person, we've been hearing UDHR a lot from the legal perspective. So going beyond legal, like looking from the political, as a political scientist, is like breathing fresh air into the subject. I'm not quite sure how United Nations will react to this, especially UDHR has been a document way back in the 1940s. Perhaps it's not suitable anymore, especially in the context of values that you have raised, and also the responsibility of member states. But I will leave that for commentaries later on. But due to, again, time constraint, we have our last speaker, Professor Puneet, who is an associate professor. Professor Puneet is an associate professor of law in the Center for the Study of Law and Governance, Jawaharlal Nehru University.
Yeah, please. Professor Dr. P. Puneet is already there. Yeah, please. You can invite him for the talk.
Okay, yes. Prof. Puneet, please.
Thank you. Madam.
He is professor in this Center for Law and Governance in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India. And Professor Puneet was earlier associated with the Indian Law Institute. And now he is in Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he is known for his contributions to his field of study. And we welcome him, and we feel really proud for having him with us. I would request him to kindly make your presentation. I can say about him that he's a very seasoned scholar and goes to the things to the depth. That's how we know him in India like that. And now he's making a presentation on a very important aspect of this international covenant, which may be said to be having a purpose of human rights, but ultimately the purpose is the establishment of peace. That's a road to peace, and that's how people have to understand it. Professor P. Puneet, please.
Thank you, sir, for the kind words. Honorable Chairperson of the Institute of Objective Studies, Dr. Manzoor Alam, Honorable Vice Chairperson, Professor Afzal Wani, the Chairperson of this technical session, Professor Zela Kamaruddin, my distinguished co-speakers, Professor Sanjay Singh, Dr. Asad Malik, and Dr. Khalid Hassan, other dignitaries, invitees, and participants. It is absolutely a great honor and a privilege to participate in this conference. At the outset, I would like to thank esteemed Professor Afzal Wani, the Vice Chairperson of the Institute, and other members of the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity. I must also compliment them for choosing this wonderful theme, Principal Foundations for Global Peace. It is important to identify and reinforce the principal foundations of global peace in times like these. which is witnessing deterioration of the average level of global peacefulness. As for the Global Peace Index of 2020, the average level of global peacefulness has deteriorated by 0.34% in 2020 itself. The deterioration has not happened for the first time in 2020. The Global Peace Index of 2020 itself points out that this is the 9th time in the last 12 years that the global peacefulness has deteriorated. Peacefulness has declined by 2.5% since 2008. It is undoubtedly a serious cause for concern. Hope this conference helps in not only diagnosing the problem, but also in finding solutions for it. I have been asked to speak on the broad theme of role of ICCPR and the other international human rights instruments in fostering global peace. Let me start by telling you at the outset, I don't doubt that you already know this, that the peace is much more than just the absence of violence. It represents a status where societies can thrive and develop intellectually, culturally, and materially in a harmonious and cohesive manner. As is well accepted now, global peace has two dimensions: negative peace and the positive peace. Whereas the negative peace connotes just the absence of violence, the positive peace refers to the attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. It focuses on conditions that really create and sustain peace over time. It is in this context that we need to look at the ICCPR and other international human rights instruments and appreciate the significance in creating and sustaining conditions that are sine qua non for not only establishing global peace, but also for preserving it over time. The proposition that human rights remain relevant to peace is indisputable. There are so many scholars who have pointed out and substantiated this point. I must say here that the idea that respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms are very much essential for establishing and preserving global peace was not formally recognized for the first time when the ICCPR was adopted in 1966. It was formally and explicitly recognized and incorporated in the UN Charter itself that was adopted in 1945, which brought into existence an overarching body called the United Nations Organizations. It is evident from the preamble to the UN Charter, which categorically states that we, the people of the United Nations, determined to affirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small. And it also determined to promote social progress and better standard of life in larger freedom. It is reinforced more explicitly and categorically in Article 55 of the UN Charter, which says that with a view to creation of conditions of stability and well-being, which are necessary for peaceful and friendly relations among nations, the United Nations shall promote higher standards of living, full employment in conditions of economic and social progress and development. And most importantly, it emphasizes on the universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. Further, Article 56 obligates all member states to pledge themselves to take joint and separate action in cooperation with the United Nations organizations for the achievement of the purposes set forth in Article 55. It was in pursuance thereof, a giant and a gigantic step was taken to draft and adopt the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and it is a milestone document in the history of human rights. The preamble of the UDHR also unequivocally proclaims that the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundations of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. It is also acknowledged that disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind. The framers of the UDHR, who came with different legal and cultural backgrounds, from all regions of the world have noted that the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief, and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspirations of the common people. They realize that it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by rule of law. The UDHR recognizes both civil and political rights as well as the socio-economic and cultural rights. It is an unequivocal endorsement that both sets of rights, both the civil and political rights as well as the socio-economic and cultural rights, are foundations for global peace. When these universal declarations were converted into binding commitments, these two sets of rights have been split into two different covenants, as all of you are well aware of it, ICCPR and the ICESCR. This was because of the significant difference between the members of the United Nations and the relative importance of the negative civil and political rights versus the economic, social, and cultural rights that are envisaged in the ICSCR. The rights recognized under the ICCPR were called first generation rights, whereas the rights recognized under the ICSCR were called the second generation rights, though both were adopted on the same day in the General Assembly on December 16, 1966. The irony is that the ICESCR containing the so-called second generation rights was brought into force few months before the ICCPR containing the so-called first generation rights. The Vienna Declaration and Program of Action adopted by the World Conference on Human Rights held in Vienna in 1993 eliminated this distinction, at least in principle, by declaring that all human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent and interrelated. It has thus once again reinforced the importance of both sets of rights in establishing and preserving peace at both the domestic and the global levels. It is not just these three instruments, the UDHR, the ICCPR, and the ICSCR, which are called as International Bill of Rights. Various other international human rights instruments also play a significant role in ensuring global peace. In any case, all the international human rights instruments revolve around the UDHR and they directly draw inspiration from it. There is no gainsaying that these human rights instruments actually reinforce the global peace, and unless these rights are secured to all without any discrimination, global peace remains an enigma and cannot be established on firm footings. If we look at the progress we have made in securing human rights to all, the report card seems to be abysmal. Even if one were to look at the ICCPR, which contains the so-called first generation rights, the report of the Freedom House published in 2017 suggests that enjoyment of political and civil rights around the world had deteriorated to its lowest point in the last 12 years. As per the estimates in the report, only 39% of the world population can be considered to be free, which means to say only 39% of the world population have these civil and political rights. They can enjoy these civil and political rights. In order to understand where each country stands as far as the implementation of the ICCPR is concerned, one has to look at the periodic reports submitted by the countries to the Human Rights Committee and its remarks or concluding observations on such reports. Of course, that's a very arduous task. I'm not going into the details of it. But an overview of all such reports and concluding observations by the HRC shows that we have miles to go for translating these rights into living realities. The position of the economic, social, and cultural rights guaranteed under the ICSCR is even worse. As an example, one can look at the Oxfam annual report showing global inequality. Inequality is growing at a much faster rate than ever before, both in India and at the global level. That clearly indicate the awful indifference we have shown to implementation of economic, social, and cultural rights. That is just one example. Let me reiterate in conclusion that if world peace is to be established on firmer grounds and preserved over time, then it must be built on the bedrock of human rights. As the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action proclaims, democracy, development, and respect for human rights and fundamental freedom are interdependent and mutually reinforcing. All of them, in my opinion, constitute the foundations of global peace. If we do not want the world to be in pieces and the world peace to be a reality, we must then focus on strengthening democracy, ensuring development, and securing human rights to all without any discrimination. With this, I end. Thank you, one and all, and I look forward for any questions or comments at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. It has been a very enlightening session. And I would like to say thank you to IOS through its secretariat for coming out with this theme, and this is usual because number one, although this is not particularly my area, I have decided to agree to be the chairperson because I thought this would be a learning curve for me. And when I heard all the presentations, I guess this is Prof. Wani's idea and his team to look into redefining responsibilities of nation states and global community for contributing to promotion of peace process. And he starts perhaps requesting some of us to look, number one, on the issues like coming from Prof. Sanjay Singh, commitment as a world, commitment to the world community, but his focus is on attaining durable international cooperation and the United Nations peace paradigm of responsibility. So he's looking at from the paradigm of responsibilities. And this is followed by Dr. Asad Malik, where it is interesting because he is looking through relevant universal instruments to see again responsibilities of nation states for promoting within their jurisdictions, societies. And next followed by Dr. Khalid Wasim, looking at from a different perspective, from a political science perspective, on the relevance, effectiveness, and relevance of underlying values. When you talk about values in the 21st century, it goes beyond law. Although law and ethics are interrelated, but coming from legal background, I guess we will always discuss from the legal perspective, and to have somebody, not a legal person, to discuss this would be good, very good. Last but not least, I'm impressed with Prof. Muni, who is really being honest here, Prof, when you discuss about are the conventions really being followed to attain global peace, or it's just what UN is doing is like, okay, just business as usual, but to have somebody to say that, hello, excuse me, we have to do more than what we should. No, so thank you to all the 4 speakers. Again, I said this is a learning curve for me, and I'm happy that Prof. Wani is co-chairing this session. I believe Prof, with his long experience in the legal arena, and he seems to have very good grasp of what is happening in the United Nations You know, and I did question myself as well when I attended a few sessions there in New York, and I was like feel a little bit frustrated. And then when I inquired, I was told that this is the nature of UN, the nature of UN, and because it's a very big entity, so to move, to cajole, to push, they have to have certain protocols, I guess. So I hand over back the session to Prof. Wani to chair, Prof, especially as the secretariat, whether we have time for questions and answers, Prof, please.
Okay.
I guess my job is done.
We thank the chairperson for giving very rich inputs as well as conducting the session. And I believe that you will continue to be with us in future also in various programs so that we carry on the mission of academics and peace ahead through iOS and then IIU as well. So thank you, ma'am, for your contribution and participation. So we now get to, because of time, we now get to the next session, which will be the last session of today's, the first day. And the theme is Principal Universal Foundations for Peace, their adoption through United Nations resolutions, treaties, declarations, and conventions. Chairperson is Professor Mirza Asmar Beg, and I believe he'll be joining just now. But I think because of the paucity of time, we should start the presentations. And the first presentation for this session is from two scholars from Rajasthan University, Professor Raj Purohit. He is Dean and Director, Faculty of Law, University of Rajasthan, Jaipur. And another is Dr. Abhishek Tiwari. He is also from the same faculty, and they will be making the presentation on basic universal dicta for advancement of international and social peace through economic, social, and cultural rights. So, Professor Dr. Raj Purohit, please join. Yeah, he is here. You please unmute yourself. आप यहाँ से unmute कर दीजिए. Yeah, and please on your video also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You on your video, please. Please, your video is, we are not able to see.
Sir. Sir, it has been, but due to some technical reason.
Okay, you will. Okay, no problem. Then you can speak as such.
Thank you.
We would have liked.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Good afternoon to all. First of all, yeah, sir. Good afternoon to all.
Good afternoon.
First of all, I welcome all the participants of the 2 days online international conference on identification of Principal Foundation for Global Peace. My deliberation on basic universal dicta for advancement of international and social peace through denouncement of subjugation and authoritarianism under International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights 1966. This topic shall be discussed by me and my colleague Dr. Abhishek Tiwari jointly. The International Covenant on Social, Economic and Cultural Rights was adopted for signature, ratification and accession by General Assembly resolution on 16 December 1966. Following almost 20 years of drafting debates, it finally gained the force of law a decade later into force 3rd January 1976. The covenant contains some of the most significant international legal provisions establishing economic, social and cultural rights, including rights relating to work in just and favorable conditions, to social protection, to an adequate standard of living, to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health, to education and to enjoyment of benefits of cultural freedom and scientific progress. The preamble of this covenant talks about recognition of dignity and the equal rights of all members of the human family as the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. It further recognized that in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the ideal of free human beings enjoying freedom from fear and want can only be achieved if conditions are created where everyone may enjoy this economic, social, and cultural rights, as well as his civil and political rights. Objective of covenant, economic, social, and cultural rights are designed to ensure the protection of people as full person, based on perspective in which people can enjoy rights, freedoms, and social justice simultaneously. The rest part of the discussion will be done by the Dr. Abhishek Tiwari. I just invite to Abhishek Tiwari to join us.
Good noon, all the dignitaries. The topic which has been given to us that includes the three important areas. Sir, I request you that I will join from the video of Dr. Raj Purohit sir, so that I can share the screen. So both the videos can be on. I am sharing the screen from the Dr. Raj Purohit sir.
You unmute yourself.
Yes.
क्या कह रहे हैं?
Okay. Just a minute.
क्या presentation है?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Share screen.
Today's discussion involves three important aspects. Number one, the question is, what is authoritarianism? Authoritarianism is characterized by highly concentrated and centralized government power maintained by any political party and the exclusion of potential challenges. It uses political parties and mass organization to mobilize people around the goals of the regime. Authoritarianism also tends to embrace informal and unregulated exercise of political power. A leadership that is self-appointed and even if elected and unregulated. It exercises of political power that is self-appointed and even if elected cannot be displaced by its citizens. Free choice among competitors.
उनका स्क्रीन देखिए, जैसे ये असल में उनका कैमरा एक्चुअली नहीं चल रहा है।
इनका अभिषेक कर रहा है।
अभिषेक जी अभिषेक जी जरा दोबारा कीजिए।
Sir, sir, I am sharing this. Yes, I am sharing this with Dr. Raj Purohit's entry. Actually, I am coming from the mobile, so the screen cannot be shared from it.
Okay, ठीक है.
So I am sharing the screen with Dr. Raj Purohit. Yes, you can go through the screen. The presentation is on Raj Purohit sir, so you can.
Okay, you go on speaking, please.
Yes. Okay, sir. So it is we were discussing the authoritarianism. It is intolerant to civil liberties and meaningful opposition. It controls the state with the support of armed forces and bureaucracy, having allegiance to it. It uses mass media to spread its influence. So it is the antithesis to plurality. Authoritarianism is marked by indefinite political tenure of the ruler or ruling party, often in a one party or other authority. The authoritarianism and democracy cannot run parallel. The transition from an authoritarian system to a more democratic form of government is referred to as a democratization. Again, the second term which is related with our discussion, that is, what is subjugation? Subjugation, so we will understand what is subjugation. Subjugation, on the other hand, is a result of authoritarianism. Literal meaning of subjugation is oppression. Subjugation is the most common pattern of conflict of a subjugated minority is denied equal access to the culture and lifestyle of the larger society. Subjugation may be based on the law or de jure. An example was the de jure segregation of public schools in the United States during the later part of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. In that case, the Supreme Court overturned previous case laws that had made racial segregations legal in the USA. Even in India, subjugation based on minority, class, sect, creed, caste, and custom is prevalent. Although Constitution of India does not accept all such kind of subjugation, but de facto these are visible at large arena. Subjugation may also arise from the everyday practices of people, even when specific laws do not exist to deny opportunities to minority groups. De facto is a term used in case law that describes the actual or real situations regardless of what has been there in the law. De facto segregation is operating when, for example, neighboring homeowners agree among themselves not to sell to members of certain ethnic group or races. De facto discrimination exists when people of certain background are not promoted to important positions in local government or in business because of widely held stereotypes. Although illegal, the difficulty of probing bias can make this type of subjugation a very effective tool for controlling a minority. In this way, we have understood the two important aspects of subjugation and authoritarianism. Now we can come on the legal prospect of civil of these rights and Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights 1966. It's a relevant document which is related to our discussion. The objective of this is to ensure economic and social and cultural rights to all without any discrimination across the member states. Adopted on 16 December 1966 but came in force on 3rd January 1976. It protects rights relating to work in just and favorable conditions, to social protection, to an adequate standard of living, to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health, to education, and to enjoyment of the benefit of cultural freedom and scientific progress of all. All the member states are bound to add these rights in their domestic laws. What was need of ICSCR in 1966? We can understand the need by going through the report presented by United Nations Development Program. As per UNDP report, 1/5 of the world goes hungry every night. 1/4 of population have access of safe drinking water. 1/3 is forced to live in abject poverty. A large section of society is not permitted to propagate their culture freely and fairly. Subjugation of minorities in many nations has become a state policy. These were the circumstances due to that this ICSCR was required. How ICSCR helps to denounce authoritarianism and subjugation. The 1966 Covenant binds the member state to ensure following rights of every person without any discrimination. right to work, Article 6, favorable conditions of work, Article 7, right to form trade unions, Article 8, right to social security, Article 9, right to adequate food, house, clothing, right to education, to choose a school, right to take part in cultural life. These are the important rights. Now, coming to the mechanism of ICSER to ensure implementation. A supervisory body is made to monitor the member states having 54 members with 18 independent experts. This has come into force following the entry into force of the optional protocol to the covenant in May 2013. The committee on these rights was given the mandate to consider complaints, the national violations, and provide an international remedy for victims who are denied remedies at the national level. Under the protocol, states can opt in the inquiry procedure. Once they have done so, the committee can carry out inquiries into situations relating to that country if it receives reliable information alleging grave or systematic violations. The committee can inquire if there is discrimination, oppression, or subjugation of a particular sect, cult. Similarly, an interstate complaints procedure permits one state to make complaints against another if both have opted into this procedure. Recognition of economic, social, and cultural right is not limited to grassroots campaigners. So, in the circumstance, we can see whether ICSER is competent to interfere in subjugation by a state. So, although committee cannot interfere directly, but as I told, most of subjugation are de facto. If sufficient protective laws are made for minorities, then subjugation can be controlled to a large extent. The binding nature of member state to enforce the covenant in their domestic laws ensures that the subjugation does not become a state policy of authoritarian country. If sufficient favorable laws are present, then subjugated class can approach to the courts for protection. In India, laws on reservation, scheduled caste and scheduled tribes laws, domestic violence act, etc. are few examples which protect a vulnerable minor community. Again, we have certain kind of future challenge. Although this covenant has successful to an extent, but larger goals are yet to be achieved. The committee under this covenant is toothless and only for advisory nature. Even they cannot ask the country, they cannot pursue the country. The power to sanction are not adopted by member state if there is any default on their parts. The incident of subjugations are underreported. Many authoritarian states have not ratified this covenant and hence it is not applicable on them. There are certain suggestions in the background of these gray areas. The committee under ICSER should be given power to sanction in the form of compensation to oppressed class. There must be a provision of individual reporting of a citizen of a state against the state. The incident of hunger, poverty, subjugation, etc. should be widely published in order to pressurize the member state. The member state should be warned and subsequently economic and trade sanctions are to be imposed if a state fails to take corrective measures. So these are some suggestions, and with this I thank you the organizers for providing us opportunity to speak on such a contemporary and relevant topic, because the whole world is facing challenges due to subjugation and authoritarian regime. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much. As we had with us Professor Govind Singh Raj Purohit and Dr. Kumar Tiwari from Rajasthan University, and they gave their valuable contribution to the conference. I thank them from the core of my heart, and definitely I believe they'll be sending their final presentation for this in the form of the article to be published. And I'm grateful to them. They took time. They have a lot of work to do in Rajasthan University. That's a very big contributing university to this studies in law. So I'm grateful to you again. God bless you and thank you. And now we are having with us definitely a very great erudite scholar of law, whom I have seen him for the last 2 decades, with a very sensitive heart and very vibrant in his working and contributing to the development of university, very much by heart concerned about academics. I mean Professor Dr. Anuj Kumar Vaksha. He is Professor of Law in University School of Law and Legal Studies, GGS Indraprastha University. He has earlier worked with this International Committee of Red Cross as well, and he is an expert of international humanitarian law as well. And he has been teaching many subjects ranging from corporate law to human rights, then jurisprudence, this law and governance, global justice. So all he has taken, and he is having a very important theme this time to address about, as we have, sustainable development goals, goal 16 from United Nations on peace, justice, and strong institutions for promotion of global peace. So I request Professor Vaksha to please address the conference and enlighten us. Professor Anuj Kumar Vaksha.
Well, very warm good afternoon to one and all present here. My very warm gratitude to Professor M. Afzalwani for his kind words, which I take as his kind blessings over me, which I have been having for over around 2 decades now. Since 2004 or something, I had known him. And he has always been trying to promote us. And today, as a professor, I owe a lot to him. I congratulate and wish the Institute of Objective Studies, its chairman, worthy chairman, and other esteemed participants here and co-speakers. The topic which has been assigned to me, prospective relevance of UN Sustainable Development Goal 16, peace, justice, strong institutions for promotion of global justice, peace. Now, like it has lot many things which are there in this topic, which I understand 15 minutes would be being very unfair to cover them all. So like a teacher, I first focus on the most relevant part. Out of all this, one which is the central to all this, and possibly the root of all these things, where all these things will prevail, and an area which is of my special concern and possibly special liking, global justice. So in my presentation, I will try to look at global justice from a perspective which is slightly different from what we generally get to read. And around that, some of the issues which have been highlighted, sustainable goals, etc., that is how I will connect them. Let me share my screen with respect to this to make it a little easier to understand the issues around the global justice. Is the screen visible, sir, from that side? The screen is there? Okay. So what is global? Somewhere we were linked to, the topic was linked to global peace and justice. So people have been saying this, that there cannot be peace until there is justice. And I have said the same thing, but possibly in not many words. A just world is greatest guarantee to global peace, and unjust world is possibly the greatest threat to global peace. Until there is justice globally, there won't be peace globally. So peace follows justice and not vice versa. That is, the justice may not necessarily come out of a peaceful world. Rather, peace comes out of the justice. So quest for justice should be our primary goal. And I understand even globally, all good things that we aspire, be it global peace or global prosperity, that comes out of justice, which we understand as global justice. So what is this? This is a pictographic, nature's perspective to the relationship between global peace and global justice. So global peace is like the flower which blossoms over the trees that we find. And wherever we want to establish global peace, the global justice must be there. So to my mind, global justice is the primary objective for which all of us should aspire for, all of us should endeavor for, and that is how that will lead us to global peace. So what is this global justice? One is to know what is this global justice, then how do we make global justice, that is, how do we establish global justice, and how the global justice can be sustained, created, so on and so forth, almost interrelated. Before we endeavor to understand global justice or define global justice, a word of caution. And that word of caution is that innumerable unjust wars have been fought in the history of mankind to defend justice. Innumerable wars, the gravest of unjust wars, have been fought in the mankind to defend justice. And so we have to be very careful, very, very careful while defining justice. And often we define justice, that's one, and then we defend justice that leads to undesirable consequences. And the mankind has actually been witness to such kinds of undesirable consequences, primarily in the forms of unjust wars. So before I endeavor to define global justice, I have given this caution, this warning, that it should not become a tool for unjust wars. So what is global justice? I put before this esteemed audience, this esteemed house, three approaches to global justice. Just understanding global justice, I am not into other aspects of justice. Very elementary, very first question, what is global justice? And my understanding, this question can be looked from three different perspectives. One perspective is what we may say the idealist approaches to global justice or idealist approach to global justice. Second is ideological approaches to global justice. What are these ideological approaches? We will come. The third is curative approaches or remedial approaches to global justice. And they are not segregated like iron compartments. There are overlapping in intersect between them. But how are they different from each other? It all depends as to what kind of emphasis do we have. If the emphasis is on certain say, idealistic approach, if on certain ideologies, then ideological approach, and then on the remedy, what kinds of remedy to what, we will come when we do this curative approach. So first, idealistic approach to global justice. The basic premise of this idealistic approach is world is an ideal place to live. And for any region, if it is not ideal, it is our highest duty, our bounden duty to make it ideal. and perfect for all human beings by all means and by all method. So we look at the world as an ideal place, and if that idealism is not there, we undertake it as our bounden duty, the highest duty, to make it an ideal place. And we know that in the known history of mankind, there has not been a just world ever. There has been imaginations, contemplations, reflections, thinking about the ideal world, but in the history of the mankind, absolutely ideal world, absolutely just world, we have not known, although there have been more just, less just, better just, all those kinds of things, but absolutely ideal thing has been missing. So by its very nature, imagination plays great role, contemplation plays great role. It's a reflective kind of ideal. Human intuition, human sense of idealism, it's important. So often it is also described, it's a poet's paradise. What poets say, often they describe in their words, in their poems, in their phraseology, what would make a great world, or a sense ideal world, the way the saints look at it, or a philosopher's inspirational world. We, as an academy, possibly we are more connected to philosophers. Then, of course, things goes on. But all these things. Somewhere you will take note that I have not mentioned statesman. Possibly role of statesman might come at somewhere, some other place than here. Here I have looked at it primarily as a poet's paradise, a sense ideal world, or a philosopher's inspiration world. Global justice, look from this perspective, is an unending and possibly utopian enterprise. Why unending? Because ideal things possibly doesn't exist. We might do our best, but the fact is the earth where we are born, it is full of imperfections, and happy life, good life is one where we accept imperfections to some extent. But this is a debatable question. One can contest it, but this is how one can look at it. But the flip side of this ideal approach is that justice zealots may adopt unjust means and methods to create, endeavoring to create an ideal or say absolutely just world. So often I was reminded of one person, Pol Pot. He is reported to have killed around 25% of his own population in Cambodia to establish a state which would be totally equal for everybody. He could hardly obtain that, but he ended up killing possibly a substantial population of his own state. Then I come to ideological approaches. And this is something which is more widely prevalent than than the other one. And here the basic premise is global justice is envisaged as an ideological enterprise and as an ideological objective. You define the objective, you define what is right, and then accordingly you work. And some of the ideologies which have played significant role in the history of the mankind over the years, Marxist ideologies, we know, capitalist ideologies, we know, liberalist ideologies. Morning, Mr. Dayton was here talking about this. Theological approaches, religion-based approaches, supranationalist or internationalist, lots of enthusiasts nowadays are coming up, which are propagating that there should be supranational bodies, super government, supranational government, so on and so forth. Then supranationalist, and then supremacist of one or other kind. All these approaches invariably turns out to be conflict-based approach. To promote one's own ideology, you tend to negate others, which leads to conflict between one set of followers to the other set of followers. And often ideological obsessions create more obstructions to global justice than the pathways to global justice. But again, this is a matter of experience. My understanding is that almost all of these ideologies which have been stated above, they have created more of obstructions to global justice than a way forward to global justice. So despite almost 100 years of Marx writing about Marxist thesis, we remain, and possibly some people will say, we have become far more unfair world than what we may have been 200 years ago. Then the third one, which is curative approach, and I take it as a bottom-up approach kind of thing, and where basic premise is that global justice is remedy to injustices found globally. So identify where and what are the injustices, target them, and then find the remedy or establish the remedy. So identification and finding of injustices become globally, injustices globally becomes the key focus. Remedying them becomes the central theme in this, say, approach to global justice. And so this is focused to the wrongs or targeted against the wrongs. This is curial in nature. You try to remediate. It's problem solving than possibly problem creating. And this is minimalist approach. It's not ambitious that I want the world to be of my kind. No, the world is what it is. Let's address the problem one by one, address the bigger problem the first, the lesser one, the lesser evils the later. Variety of ways can be found in resolving the injustices around. I take this as, hello. I take this as a curative approach. So in this curative approach, my lacking of the thing is this curative approach. So how does it work? Curative approach. Where does one find greatest warrior? I would say in the den of most horrific devils. So where would one find great ideas of global justice? Hello. Am I audible? Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Okay, so another 5 minutes I will take, sir. Wind up. Yeah, so curative approach to global justice, where does one find the great ideas of global justice? From this curative approach, I would say in the milieu of globally most rampant and grave injustices. So find this. Hello.
You are audible. Please proceed.
Please proceed. It may be problem there.
Okay. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is how find the global problems wherever they may be. And this finding itself is a big exercise, and it depends on collective human conscience, sensitivity, understanding, wisdom, knowledge, so on and so forth. So globally most rampant and grave injustices, where do we find it? It's multi-layered, at least 4 layers that we can find. Injustices against the individuals, injustices against the community, injustices against the state, injustices against the international community. Injustices against the individuals may involve threats to material well-being, the basic needs, food, clothing, housing, energy, clean environment, safety, security, freedom, liberty, dignity, self-esteem, civil and political rights, human rights, so on and so forth. A variety of things can be identified, which all of us want. And when we find threatened, I understand that is a threat to global justice. Remedying those threats becomes one of the objectives of global justice. So threats against the individuals or injustices against the individuals. Then threats to the community well-being. Threats to community at the level, then other level, one against the individual, then against the community. Threats to one's community identity, threats to community values, mutual respect, fraternal association, cultural practices, collective progress, threats to community institution, be it family, be it moral fabric, be its religious sentiments, then environmental and ecological concerns of the community, and right to development. Again, it can further be. All of these are just illustrative, not exhaustive, something which I could find and thought of, that things which needs to be established at the level of the community and protected further from the perspective of global justice. Then injustices against the state. Even states can become subject matter of injustices. And when I say so, I understand what is a state, a legally constituted and legally empowered entity committed to preserve and enhance individual as well as community well-being. The two things which were subject matter of preservation, individual and community. Here comes the state as an institution which is committed to preserve this. So this identity of the state, the power of the state, the ability of the state itself needs to be preserved to promote the well-being of the individual and well-being of the community. Now we may find it difficult to accept it because there are alternate theories which often put the state as one of the grave, threats to global justice. And of course, that might be true. But in idealistic sense, we understand the state is a moral entity. It has some well-defined legal functions. And if that be true, existence of the state becomes important to promote global justice. And when I say state as an entity whose identity needs to be preserved, I also accept that it owes duty to international community. It has obligations to international community. So injustices against the state may involve disturbances to state existence, acts prejudicial to state's existence, acts prejudicial to interest and capabilities or potential of the state. And so this is how I have looked at, global justice, and global justice as a gateway to global peace. Now, what role does SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, have to this thesis of global justice that I have just talked of? And I'm very happy to see that most of these goals which have been identified in Sustainable Development Goal, number one, they are more community, individual oriented, the basic needs of the individual. So out of these around 17 sustainable goals, around 10 of them are just focused to the individuals. And then other ones are focused to the community well-being. And then the third one is possibly, there are a couple of, maybe 3 of them, which I can stretch to understand that at international level also, certain institution needs to be created. Certain institution also needs to be established to sustain or to promote or to establish global justice. So in poverty for all its in all its form, individual-centric, end hunger, achieve food security, individual-centric, ensure healthy lives, individual-centric, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education, again individual-centric, achieve gender equality, again individual-centric, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation, I would say individual and community, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern energy for all, individual-centric, and of course community, promote sustained, inclusive, sustainable economic growth. We talk of economic growth, we can't talk of economic growth at individual level. The community has to play, the state has to play a role. So relates to community or the state. We build resilient infrastructure again at the level of the community or the state, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, community in the state, ensure sustainable consumption production pattern, again community in the state. So combat action, climate change, all international community, conserve sustainable use of ocean sea, international community, protect, restore, promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, again at international level. So look from this curative perspective, I find that global justice, look from this approach, but the three approaches that I have just stated seems to be a useful tool. And once we have global justice, the kind that I am talking, I understand we are better oriented to establish the regime of global peace. So again, this is what I had to say. I understand the time constraint of the organizers and everybody. I did not want to infringe upon others' time. I stop here. I shall happily address any questions that might be there. Again, my thanks to all the participants, all the listeners, and everybody who gave me opportunity to share some of my thoughts. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Anuj Kumar Vaksha. That was a very great and full of concepts and full of concerns. But I think the global community has to put its heads together and then develop very strong institutional mechanism for attaining global peace. And that's most needed in view of the sufferings which are taking place everywhere. As you underscored, the different kinds of injustices which are, apprehended and which are actually taking place as well. So that's, I think the global community should now take a note of all these important things which you underline. We are grateful to you for your contribution. Now, dear friends, we are having with us the last speaker of the day, but very brilliant one, great, and she is Batul Zahur Qazi from Maldives. She is a faculty member there, the Maldives National University, and she is a very great seminary and has been attending conferences world over, and that's how we are blessed to get her with us, and she will speak on gender equality and women empowerment, because without women we can't have peace, and the world is anything what women can do it. And earlier we had a presentation from Zaliha madam, and that was also related to women, and I believe that now the world is underlining the role which should be played by women for bringing peace to the world, and that's how I would request now Batul to please make your presentation, and we are keen to listen to you. This is the last of the day, and it will be really very brilliant. Okay, Batul Zahur Qazi.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. So I have to thank Professor Afzal, sir, for giving me an opportunity, and I think for expressing so kind words, which of course I have a way to go and a lot to learn, but hopefully today's experience will be good mutually, learning experience from all the distinguished speakers so far. So I think it's last, and I'll make it very short and precise. But like we begin our discussion on the role of gender and the gender disparities and how it has a relevance with the peace-related process, I would like to quote the former US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, when she outlined the Hillary Doctrine in 2009, in which she proclaims that the US has made empowering women and girls a cornerstone of our foreign policy, because women's equality is not just a moral issue and not just a humanitarian issue, not just an issue of fairness, but it's an issue relating to security. And it says, give women the equal rights and entire nations are stable. Deny women their rights, and you see how the instability is certain. And I think when it comes to the role of gender, and particularly in global peace or peace-related processes, I think it is this discourse and this narrative that should be predominant and robust while we aim to establish long-lasting peace. So, and it is through through United Nations, like Professor Zulekha mentioned, and many other efforts, particularly in the UN, and we've seen that there has a consensus emerging that how the role of women is imperative in establishing peace. But at the same time, the UN is trying to make all the efforts to make sure that conflicts not relapse. But when we look at these normative things that are happening globally, particularly under the aegis of the United Nations, we also see a very dismal fact that women, in terms of conflict, they are actually given a very peripheral role when it comes to peace building processes. They're not actually much represented, and their narratives are not given the due share, or did not receive due attention as they should have received otherwise, to ensure that we establish a stronger peaceful societies in the aftermath of conflict, or at least we prevent conflicts from happening in the first place. And if you look at the data, I would like to quote this. They would suggest that women, they have hardly been a part of any peace building process. I mean, in its totality, we only see maybe 8% of women who must have participated in the UN mediating peace processes. And also maybe only 19% of the peace agreements would have been signed with women being represented therein. And unfortunately, if all the conflicts, if you look at the post-Cold War, we see 40% of them have relapsed. And one of the reasons, not the only reason why they would have relapsed, is the fact that there exists this gender disparity in the whole peace processes. And I think, and at the same time, although we focus on very formal peace building process, and as I've already said, that how women are being marginalized there already. So there is also a need of recognition to informal peace processes, which are as important as alongside the formal peace building processes while establishing peace. And I think if you look at, generally speaking, how does this conflict, wherever the conflict takes place, how does it actually affect women? So we've highlighted, researchers have highlighted main 5 things. That's how it affects women. And one, that it brings economic insecurities. So it's just normal, because people, they become widows, they become, they lose their family members who look after them. They're already vulnerable given their social statuses and other disparities that exist in societies. And during the conflict, they become further economically insecure. And that again does not let them give them enough spare and freedom to contribute fully in the peace-related processes. And the conflicts also create hierarchies of victimhood. For example, when I say we may focus on women as victims of gender-based or sexual violence, but we may not be giving due attention to women who have not suffered sexual violence, but may have suffered other kind of violences. Or even while we go on peace-building processes, sometimes allocation of funds or like that, we see disparities there as well. For example, if I would just quote something from Nepal. So post signing of the comprehensive peace agreement in Nepal, we see once there was allocation of the funds to the victims. So the widows of the army officers and other police officers got enough compensation, but the wives or the widows or the dependents of the Maoists did not get any. So that again creates inequalities. So while we have to understand that they're already, women are already subject to inequalities, so conflicts aggravates their inequalities, and if it's not addressed, if it's left completely unaddressed, that actually gives rise to many problems rather than resolving. And of course, continuation of trauma. The impact of violence does not end only with the formally or officially violence coming to an end. The trauma continues. And that's another reason which needs to be addressed in any peace-related discussion. It also leads to spatial and temporal dislocation. While it leads to spatial and temporal dislocation, we've read narratives from the researchers from all over the world wherever women have been subject to conflict, and they say how they find it very difficult, whether they're temporarily dislocated or permanently dislocated, to come back and start afresh. And there's no support in any peace building or post-conflict strategy which ensures how we're going to readjust them back into their normal routines, because they simply cannot get back to their past roles or simply cannot get back to the past just because the conflict has ended. And contested truths. So women often find themselves being underrepresented when it comes to narrating what exactly what happened during the conflict, what was the true facts of the conflict. So since women hardly get representation after the or during the peace processes, so we see the women always feel that their discourses or their what their experiences and challenges have not been actually represented while we try to write down the narratives. And I think that's one of the goals of transitional justice also. While we want to create a true account of the atrocities that have been committed. So where women do not get their representation, so they feel that their experiences were not fully taken care of. And again, so the conflict only presents half, the story presents only half of the facts and does not represent the other fact. So that again makes the peace building process a bit more difficult. So while I've said this, and I would just like to slightly focus back on South Asia. So the reason why I'm referring to peace in South Asia generally, now speaking generally, we all understand that it's known fact that how Asia is a diverse continent, and equally diverse is, within this Asia, this South Asian region, it's diverse in many ways. It's a home to multiple religions and ethnicities and so many things. But at the same time, South Asia is marred by equally diverse conflicts. So the conflicts are equally diverse. So when we look at this region, we see very typical and peculiar examples. Again, South Asia refers to women. We've had women leaders. We've had women representing the countries. And even now we have women who are enjoying or occupying key positions. Now, just to mention two of them, now we see in India, our former Defense Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, and in Maldives, where I'm currently speaking from, the head of the defense force is a woman, Alusa Zamaria Didi. So now this again shows that how women are enjoying a bit of their leadership roles, so that they may have a certain power in negotiating peace agreements within the region or within their own countries. But at the same time, we see on the other hand, Asia again is the only common thing that we see in Asia is how women are being oppressed or how they're marginalized. And it's sad that among the diversity, what binds us is the way we are treating women, and that not in a positive way. So, so this is what I want to analyze here would be that we have to address these disparities within our own region when we are talking about peace. Now, at the same time, what we have learned from the two world wars was that it's immaterial where and how does the conflict start. Conflict can start anywhere, it can spread everywhere. So if we look at one of the reasons why people say, like Maldives, for example, has appointed a women defense minister, is possibly they want to minimize the chance of any military coups that have taken place formally, and thus plunging the region back to instability. Although Maldives, fortunately, in the whole region, has always had a peaceful transition from dictatorships to democracy. They have not seen armed conflicts as other regions have seen. So I think this we could just take an example of rather than belittling the act that it's just a way so that you can control the army. Rather than that, it should be seen as a benchmark of how we need to give women a specific role in peace and security issues as well. And also, if we look at how women leaders in Asia have been dealt with. Now, if you look at, I want to quote the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, who, while she was the head of the state, while attempting to make sure that they have a good border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and also by trying to avoid any kind of conflicts with its neighbor India and trying to foster friendly relations. In her autobiography, she narrates that how the army generals considered it to be a sign of weakness on her part, and how she was not considered to be a good leader because she was not talking about going to war, because she thought of many social, political, economic, and other issues safeguarding her territory from Afghan, the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, so that to avoid any future conflicts within Pakistan. But at the same time, it was not viewed as something good and helpful. Rather, it was viewed in the same way that, in the same notion that exists in our society, that we epitomize violence, masculinity, and then we also epitomize, unfortunately, peace and compassion with femininity, something that is not looked good upon. So that's considered a sign of weakness and not a good trait wherever it is. So, and in Asian societies, it's also been linked that patriarchy has been considered one of the main cause of violence. So that again shows that as long as we continue to be patriarchal, we'll hardly have end to violence entirely, because one way or the other these patriarchal stereotypes will surface up, leading to an instability in the region. And that's one reason why we have to keep them in mind and need to address these. And if you again look at the Shimla Agreement, again, with all its political undertrappings and diplomatic colors, whatever we see, but we could not have imagined what the relation between the countries would have been if there was not a trust for peace. And I think we have to appreciate that at that point of time, how there was a magnanimous gesture by the then former Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, who ultimately negotiated this peace deal between the two countries. So that again shows when women are at the head, they also make very good policy decisions to ensure peace. And other forms of conflicts, not forms like entrappings of conflict in South Asia, when you look at, let's look at Nepal, let's look at Sri Lanka, or let's example of the assassination of former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. The assassin was a woman. So again, that means women in South Asia have not been confined only to the traditional role in the conflicts or aftermath, where we see them as victims of violence, passive receivers of violence, but also they have been actively taking part in hostilities, like they have been combatants. And this again is an unacceptable view, because by the time we work on the peace building processes, we hardly take recognition of these non-traditional roles that women have taken up. And we still, so the women who feel that they have been fighting actively with men, suddenly when there's peace, they have been again shunned, and they have been asked to, they're nowhere in the scene. And this was one of the features in post-comprehensive, signing the Comprehensive Peace Accord in Nepal. So where women were absolutely out of the picture, and they had no idea what was happening after that, even though they had been active combatants alongside with the male counterparts. And so in addition to this, one of the new trends that we see in Asia, sometimes not South Asia one, it's a recent study that I came across, was how women are now they are the drivers somewhere because of these unaddressed structural inequalities that they've been facing. They are the drivers of violence somewhere, where they would urge their family members to go and take part in radical, terrorism-related activities. For example, I came across a report, not a published report, but of course, I'm not sure how offensively I can quote it, but the fact that they've been asking men to go fight back in countries like Syria. So if again we are not taking women in the loop of the security discourse, we'll be creating more problems rather than solving whatever we have. So I think if you look at, we've understood these conflicts, some of them, we see that generally most, if you look at the Rwandan conflict, the reason was between the two groups was the structural inequalities, whether they were real or perceived, that have led to conflicts. Now, the idea is if we leave these gender-related inequalities persisting, we will find it very difficult to basically maintain peace and security in any region of the world. So I think what we could kind of by way of recommendation that we maybe need to look at would be that we have to give due recognition to the non-traditional roles that women acquire during the conflict and in the aftermath of it. So we need to break those traditional stereotypes. And also, women need to have active participation in decision-making and policy and security issues. Without that, we cannot have their representatives. And at the same time, we will not know what their needs are. We will not know what their challenges are. We would not know what their responses have been. And without which, peace process will be incomplete. And another thing, we need to view peace as a virtue in itself. We don't need to see peace as a sign of weakness, but rather we need to see as a benchmark of strength. Then only we can have these lasting peace. And also, when it comes to formal peace building processes, alongside that, we have to also recognize and give enough recognition and impetus to informal peace building processes. For example, if we take the example of Nepal, So there has been a study conducted, and it said, like, in post-conflict Nepal, how women were dealing with peace, because they said, of course, even though not only in Nepal but in other countries also, so the women narratives are that even though the conflict ends or the war comes to an end, but it does not bring them any peace in their lives. So they continue to be in the same traumatic state as they were before the conflict. So here, so what these people do in Nepal, they had formed a group of women-related groups where they would come and they would exchange the experiences and share how they have been affected by the violence. And then they had felt, okay, they were not the only ones who have been affected. There have been others who have been affected in difficult ways. And similarly, in countries like Bosnia, they've had that they were trying to build peace with themselves while they were relocated back to their homes and places where they were dislocated, by indulging other activities like art and decorating homes and including those kind of things. So that again has ensured that at least the women were at peace. So once they are at peace, we understand somewhere they would be contented with, they would have an inner contentment with the whole process, and that will actually contribute to peace. But that does not mean that we have to underemphasize their participation in the formal mechanisms. And like we said, like in the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and overall, if we see, although it aims at gender mainstreaming, particularly at all these levels, peace building processes, we see that not many, inside 20 years, not many countries have still followed the national action plans. So it still remains elusive as it was years and years ago. Of course, better, but nevertheless, it's still as elusive as it was. So we have to develop all these strategies, and in order to make sure that we have peace wherever we have to make sure that we take these gender narratives into account, and we have a more participation of women at the policy and the security related issues. I think I'll just wind up with this. Yeah, thank you.
Long, but now they have to take a lead ahead, and they have to get to peace initiatives as well, and they have to get peace initiatives, and that's. I believe you were listening to me earlier. If I say that we had very good presentations earlier, and then I think institution building as is very important, giving strength to institutions for bringing justice to the world and at different levels. And at the same time, we have to definitely give their due to women, and women means our mothers, daughters, sisters. And then at the same time, we have to see that what now actually world wants is peace. Much has been there in history as regards different kinds of considerations, parochial, regional, then inane kinds of considerations. And yes, definitely we have respect for faiths, but at the same time, now we have to have faith in peace. We have to see glory in peace. We have to see our pride in peace and comfort to all the human beings on the planet. We have to make this planet survive for better future for humanity. So I am grateful to all the presenters, Professor Govind Singh Rajpurohit, Dr. Abhishek Kumar Tiwari, Professor Anush Kumar Vaksha, and Professor Batul Zahur Qazi. And this covers, I believe, the whole of the subcontinent that way. And we will be having Professor Dr. Naresh Kumar Vats's presentation tomorrow because of some reason. And with this, I think we close today's proceedings, but I wish that we are all tomorrow again together, and we are having tomorrow presentations on refugees, on human trafficking, and then some special issues and economic issues and also others. So our speakers tomorrow will be Dr. Nafis Ahmed, Dr. Iqbal Ahmed, Dr. Vanna Singh, Dr. Parikshit Sirohi, Dr. Zubair Ahmed Khan, Mr. Hassan Imam, and Ms. Rubina Sultana. And then in the afternoon, we'll be having our guest from Sri Lanka. He is attorney at law in President's Council in Sri Lanka, Dr. Jayampathy Vikarma-Ratne. He will be with us, and we'll be having also with us Professor Dr. Azim A. Khan Sherwani. And that's how I request all of you to be with us tomorrow also. Tomorrow we'll be finishing by 1:30. So for the day, I am again grateful to all of you. You gave grace to the conference, you made it a success, and all your presentations in the form of articles will be published in the form of a book very shortly. And so you will send your presentations if you want to revise them. And God bless you all. And especially I am grateful to our great guest from Malaysia, Professor Dr. Zaleha, and she remained with us for the day. That shows her concern about global peace. I think everybody has to get to it, that now we have to get to humanity, and whenever human beings are forgetting certain things under some influences, there is need for giving a call and then reminding them that you are human beings and you be human, you promote humanity. That's how in earlier days avatars and prophets were coming. But now professors have to come, professors have to tell to the people, please arise, awaken, and then see you are human beings, and you have to be human, you have to promote friendship, amity, harmony, and without taking pride in anything, you have to take pride in being human beings, and humanity is to be promoted, and all should have their due in the world, and everybody's life should be meaningful. There should not be any kinds of coercions, undue influences, or violence from any cohort for anybody. Nobody should feel the pain which nobody would like to have for himself or herself, and why to have it for another one. And then get to the delicacies, as all these speakers, they were talking about. Anybody feels that there is pain, there is this thing. And maybe if somebody wants to ask a question, definitely now we may not be having many to ask questions, but still, our speakers are still there. Professor Anuj is there, Professor Batul is there, so they may respond to them if you have any questions. And at the same time, I must appreciate that we had very good advocates with us throughout the day. Janab Arshad Andrabi and also Mujibur Rahman from from the morning they are with us, and I believe that the societies and the people, they have now to appreciate that when technology has made the world one, then they have to have more focus on international law, international norms, and give up inane considerations and give up, that false pride. And as I said, all the three documents, whether it is Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or it is International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or it is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, they give importance to human beings, and a human being has a right to self-determination. He must determine his course of life. He has a right to it. And then at the same time, when he is a human being, he has to be considerate to another human being as well. He must not be imposing his own thought, his own interests and his own kinds of things. And that's how we can have a very good world in future. And that's how I would say that let every nation be compliant with international peace norms, international human dignity norms, international harmony norms, and like that. So that's how we can bring a better world into existence. And all the educational paradigms, they must have a shift, and judicial norms and systems, they must be oriented to new global order. As Professor Anuj was talking, I think now inane kinds of considerations should go now, and judges will have to be very much conscious about the global norms, international norms, and they can read the global norms in the national constitutional, national laws, as well as in our Indian Constitution. Article 51 talks of promotion of international understanding, and that's a very clear kind of direction to the state and to the states, that they must promote international understanding, and the purpose is the same. Unless international understanding is promoted, you cannot have peace, you cannot live with peace. You can't have business now in very small corners. You are transcending the borders. You want to be global, and that's how I think now those narrow things should give way to the global foundations, global norms, and academics should be global in nature. And I think in India we are having very good professors who can have a very good repute in the world, given the chance. And I think why there should not be global contacts created for academic interactions, and then accordingly let now people, if they want to take pride and in anything, let them take pride in contributing to the humanity to harmony and peace, instead of taking pride in believing their own few ideas, which definitely are not now going to have much, because the globe is already globalized. In my days of school, we did have a debate once on the issue, East is East and West is West, never the twain shall meet. And at that time, I also, I was not knowing much, but I did participate in that debate. And many were saying, yes, East is East and West is West, never the twain shall meet. But I think in our lifetimes, that came untrue. And now we find East is West and West is East. The whole globe is one. And there are certain minds which have not got globalized yet. I think they have to get globalized. They have to get more humanized. They have to get more accommodative. And that's how I think this group of intellectuals which participated in this conference this morning, I think they have a lot to say. I believe that these proceedings will be now definitely published, and they will be sent to all the different quarters to rethink, reconstructing the minds, reconstructing the thoughts, and then rebuilding the world and having truly a harmonic, a peaceful global order. And welfare institutions must be developed throughout the world, along with the business and political institutions which we are having. So that's how we plan it. But all is not that one person can do it. All is we have to learn that we together can do it. And definitely we all can do it together. And here I may end up by saying that please, if there is anybody reactionary, anybody parochial, and mostly they are in the name of some national kind of thing, some poet, thinker, hero, avatar, prophet, this. But when you will go deep into their teachings, you'll find that they have been global, they have been human, and they have been, welfare oriented. He may be any one of them, and that's how the God or the Creator would like to have world as one. He does not divide it into this thing and that thing, and he is giving this freedom to all in the world. He is giving dignity to all in the world. And then I may say, as in Surah Bani Israel, the Quran, in verse 70, it says, God says, I have given dignity to human being, and that dignity can be maintained only when we are global in perspective, when we are peaceful in perspective, and when we are harmonic in perspective. Otherwise, you cannot attain dignity. Once you are carving out and then promoting your own inane kinds of ideas, thoughts, then definitely you are exclusionary in your approach. You are not, respecting the dignity of another human being. But at the same time, every human being should have his own province, which I say that makes self-determination the basic value which every human being should enjoy. And with these words, let us now, part for that night, and tomorrow at 10, we again come together and then have some more kinds of presentations, and then look for some follow-up conference, follow-up program. And I may say that everybody had taken up such an important topic, important theme, that they can work on it more. There are more, areas and more opportunities to work on them, and then definitely, become a contributor for long to that area of study. So God bless you all. Thank you so much. Yeah, tomorrow you can ask more questions, even if they belong to any themes which were discussed today. Thank you so much. I cannot offer you coffee this time, but we will believably once we'll be having this lockdown kind of thing over. We will have on these themes, we'll have conference in Constitution Club, and then I think we'll invite you again, because you are very valuable. I believe that you can be a great kind of favor these friends of humanity for future. That's why I was saying that when no more we will have avatars, no more we'll have prophets, then we have the professors, And I have seen Professor Anuj, very scholarly he is doing, and we have to remind the humanity you are human beings. And then Professor Raj Purohit from Jaipur, very excellent, and he is grooming hundreds of scholars, and I think he has the honor of giving the junior, I think the youngest judge to the country. His student at the age of 21 got into the judiciary. That was a great thing for the Rajasthan University. And Abhishek Kumar Tiwari is also a very good scholar there, and he is helping other institutions also. That's how he is contributing. And as regards Professor Batul, she I think promoted legal education in Maldives. She has been the founder of legal education in Maldives that way. I had 1 or 2 years before she went there, visited. I didn't find anything like legal education there. There was one education society, but nothing more than that. So she's a pioneer as regards that legal education in Maldives. We'll like to have her support in future as well. And that's how I'm grateful to you. And also in absentia, I am grateful to Professor Asmar Beg also for being with us earlier, and all the speakers. So that's how I pray to God we meet next in conferences like this, and once this will be over, we will have a conference in Constitution Club that will be very close to Rajasthan as well, to Anuj Sara as well as to us also, centrally placed in Delhi.